Welcome again to this study on questions that God asked us. Again, we're looking at those questions that throughout Scripture and throughout history, God has asked God's people. And so this time, we're looking at the question, what is your name? I have a question for y'all just as we begin. I'm kind of interested. Does anybody know why your parents named you what they did? Does anybody have a story about that? I'm just kind of interested to know.
Mine's easy.
Okay.
What did
My
I
first
do?
name is the same as my dad's first name.
Okay, so you're named after your father, right? Yeah.
Yes, but that's not the name I use.
Okay, that's right. That's right.
Andrew, I don't know what I did.
You're still here, Melba.
Huh?
I still got you.
I know. Well, I don't see y'all. I don't know what I did. But I know my parents just named me Melba because she liked that name. So there you go.
Yeah.
Not named for anybody. Are you there?
We're here. We're here. You might try Alt-Tab or trying to find us, download to get there.
There it is. Okay. All right.
Now, Dale,
I'm named after my. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Sarah. Go ahead, Sarah. You go first.
I'm named after my grandmothers.
Are you
Both
really?
names. Yes.
Okay.
So,
Nice. Nice. And certainly some biblical roots in Sarah for sure.
yes.
How about you?
Yes.
Do you know?
How about me?
you? Yeah.
I don't know why I'm named Andrew. Now, my middle name, Roy, is also my father's name. And actually, it comes from a long line of Leroys that have been in my family. And so my brother's middle name is Lee, and I am grateful they split those up. Very grateful indeed. Now, Dale, I know you as Dale. What? And forgive me. What is your, if you want to share, what is your name given?
First name is Owen.
Owen. Okay, gotcha. That was your father's name as well.
Yes, it was.
Gotcha. Is there is Dale a middle name?
Oh, definitely, yes.
Okay, good. I thought so. Yeah. Does anybody know what their name means?
I know what the Dale means. It means valley.
It means what? Valley?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or
Yeah.
you could say depressed.
Say what?
Depressed.
Deep rust.
Depressed.
I like it. I did Google what Andrew means. You know what it means? It means strong and manly. So yeah. Yeah. Good, Sarah.
Sarah means princess.
Okay. You win then. Gee, that's better than strong and manly, isn't it?
No.
Yeah. Well, good. I love in the book how it says, our names are among our first gifts that we receive, right? Our parents name us and give us those gifts. And for the most part, we see those as gifts, but sometimes you might not see your first name or last name as a gift and may change it. But for the most part, people see these as gifts. And the name is something that we recognize and go by. Until I got to middle school, Drew is what my mom still calls me, and what I went by all the way through fifth grade. And being a sixth grader, I was like, I'm going to a new school. I'm going to have people call me Andrew, right? And so I've been Andrew for quite a while, but I still have two childhood friends that call me Drew, and my mom still calls me Drew. So I still have a connection with Drew, which is just kind of interesting. So in our story today, we're going to read from Genesis, and we're going to start not in chapter 30, but in chapter 27. So I will start reading. Okay, I'm just going to start reading here from I'll just start in verse 1, okay? So this is chapter 27 in Genesis, starting in verse 1. It says this. When Isaac was old and his eyes were so weak he could no longer see, He called for Esau, his older son, and said to him, "My son." "Here I am," he answered. Isaac said, "I am now an old man and don't know the day of my death. Now then, get your equipment, your quiver and your bow, and go out to the open country and hunt some wild game for me. Prepare me the kind of tasty food I like and bring it to me to eat, that I might give you a blessing, my blessing, before I die." Now Rebekah was listening to Isaac as he spoke to his son Esau. When Esau left for the open country to hunt game and bring it back, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, "Look, I overheard your father say to your brother Esau, 'Bring me some game and prepare me some tasty food to eat. So that I might now give you my blessing in the presence of the Lord before I die. Now, my son, listen carefully to what I tell you. Go out to the flock and bring me 2 choice young goats, so I can prepare some tasty food for your father, just the way he likes it. Then take it to your father to eat, so that he might give you his blessing before he dies." So Jacob said to Rebekah, his mother, "But my brother Esau is a hairy man, while I have smooth skin. What if my father touches me? I would appear to be tricking him and would bring down a curse on myself rather than a blessing." So just pause there for just a second. Who can paraphrase what's going on here? Tell me what's happening.
I'm gonna be lying. I'll be lying to daddy.
Yeah.
I'll be tricking him.
Yeah. And it's kind of interesting, Jacob's concern here too. Is he concerned about what he's going to be doing with taking the blessing? Well, no, he's concerned about what?
Getting caught. Yeah.
Getting caught. That's right.
Mhm.
And I think this passage is always funny for modern readers because like how hairy of a dude was he? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
for him to be like, my brother is like a shag carpet rug, and for some reason I can't grow any arm hair at all, right? Surely my father will know the difference. So he's worried about getting caught. But let's continue. His mother said to him, "My son, let the curse fall on me. Just do what I say. Go and get them for me." So he went and got them and brought them to his mother, and so she prepared some tasty food, just the way the father liked it. Then Rebekah took the best clothes of Esau, her older son, which she had in the house, and put them on her younger son Jacob. She also covered his hands and the smooth part of his neck with goat skins, and she handed her son Jacob the tasty food that she had prepared. By the way, how hairy was that kid? Goat skin? I mean, it feels like a goat. He's so hairy. Anyways, he went to his father and said, "My father." "Yes, my son," he answered. "Who is it?" Jacob said to his father, "I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you have told me. Please sit up and eat some of my game, so that you might give me your blessing." Isaac asked his son, "How did you find it so quickly, my son?" "The Lord your God gave me success," he replied. So let me pause there for another minute. So not only is Jacob, trying to trick his father here, but when he says, "Well, how did you get it so quickly?" What's his response? What does he use as an excuse?
God did it.
Yeah, he uses God as an excuse, right? When I was this was way back when I was in high school and part of the youth group. I had a friend that was dating a girl from the youth group, and they'd been together like 6 months, and then things, she didn't want to date him anymore, right? Things were headed south, and the way she broke up with him was to say, "I don't think God wants us to be together anymore."
Oh
Right.
man.
Which is
Called in the big guy.
called in the big guns. Which, please don't do that, right? No, you don't want to be with him. Just own it, right? Just own it. Don't blame it on God. Anyways, I thought that was kind of funny. All right, let's continue here. We're getting close. The Lord gave me success. Then Isaac said to Jacob, "Come near so I can touch you, my son, to know whether you are really my son Esau or not." Jacob went close to his father Isaac, who touched him and said, "The voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau." He did not recognize him, for his hands were hairy like those of his brother Esau, So he proceeded to bless him. Are you really my son Esau? He asked. He's got some doubts here. I am, he replied. Then he said, my son, bring me some of your game to eat, that I might bring you your blessing. Jacob brought it to him, and he ate, and he brought some wine and drank. Then his father Isaac said to him, come here, my son, and kiss me. So he went and kissed him. When Isaac caught the smell of his clothes, he blessed him and said, the smell of my son is like the smell of the field, and that the Lord has blessed. May God give you heaven's dew and earth's riches, and an abundance of grain and new wine. May the nations serve you, and people bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may the sons of your mother bow down to you. May those who curse you be cursed, and those who bless you be blessed. And so we hear that story, and of course, then Esau returns from hunting and comes to his father and says, look, I've done what you're supposed to. And what does the father say? Oh, your brother tricked me, right? I've already given out my blessing, right? I've given it out to the youngest son. So kind of an interesting story here, right? And one thing that we'll find throughout the Bible is that this kind of trickster motif, right, is something that we see throughout the Bible and throughout all sorts of stories. And so we have
Mama heading up the plot.
Yeah. And we're going to get to the second part of this reading here in just a minute, but I want to talk about names and biblical names in particular, right? Almost always in the Bible, when somebody is named something, they're named that with a purpose, right? And so we have Jacob and Esau. Anybody know what Jacob means?
Something about the foot, the heel.
Yeah, I mean the literal translation is like grabbing onto the heel of someone else, right? And we actually read it in the birth narrative for him that when he came out of the womb, Esau came first and Jacob came holding on to the foot of his brother, right?
I remember that.
And so he was named after that moment, I guess. And so as someone who's always trying to get ahead, to be a bit of a trickster, to do that, and so that's what he's named, right? So yeah, names matter. Anybody know what Esau means?
Hairy.
Yeah, it means hairy, right?
And that's weird because they named that baby. I guess maybe he had a lot of hair on his head, because I mean that's kind of, I'm just saying, you name them hairy because they're hairy. So I don't know. Anyway.
Yeah, we still have some Harrys around these days, but they're probably not named after the amount of body hair they have when they come out of the womb, right? Yeah, but he's named Harry. But we see that throughout the Bible, right? That people are sometimes children are named based on what they look like or some features that they have. And of course, when it comes to names of people have a profession, their names often include what profession they're in as well, right? Can you think of some biblical examples of that? So it's interesting when we hear about the disciples being called, right? They're called, but what also comes along with their calling and with their naming? Very often.
Son of someone.
What's that?
Like son of someone. Like son of Zebedee. Or
the son of Zebedee and all that kind of stuff. But also, what were Andrew and Peter's professions?
Obviously, the fisherman.
Fishermen, right? Fisherman. And so right along as they are called, they also include their profession as well, right? And in biblical times, people might refer to Andrew as Andrew the fisherman, right? Or John the blacksmith, and even it's continued when we read in Scripture about another John. His last name's not Baptist, right? He in essence is named because of what he does, right? John the Baptist, John the Baptizer, right? And so especially in biblical times, what people were named sometimes went around their physical appearance, but often what they did was tied to their name, right? When you say somebody's name, you would also include what they did, what their profession was mattered, right? So throughout the Bible, when we hear names, we very regularly hear about people's professions as well. Now, do we still do that some here, or have we gotten rid of that practice? Or
I mean, do we
I don't
literally,
think it's,
I mean, all I can think of is carryovers. I mean, I've heard at some point, like, okay, let's just say their last name was Taylor. I mean, maybe they had some history in that direction, or like you said, Black or Blacksmith, maybe they, their names may indicate their heritage, but not necessarily so.
certainly, yeah. And Jim, what were you gonna say?
well, I was in that verse. I might have to go in another room, Andrew. Hang on.
You're okay.
Well, what I was going to say is that I don't think the names are tied to the professions anymore, but I think our impressions of people sometimes are tied to professions, which is similar to that same situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, often when we meet people, and one of those casual conversation pieces is, maybe where did you grow up? Where do you live? How did you meet each other? And what do you do? Right? What's your job? What do you do? We ask that question. And I'm guessing when people answer society-wise, there's some jobs that we tend to think are more important and have more respect than others. Can you think of any jobs that when people say, "Oh, I'm Andrew, I'm that garner a little more respect"?
Well, doctors, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. Doctors, professors. Yeah.
And the reverse of that would be attorneys, Andrew.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we laugh, but yeah, often attorneys, personally, I've had good experiences with attorneys, especially with option and stuff, but certainly they can get a bad name, can't they?
Or these days, politicians would be another example of that, probably. Yeah.
And in biblical times, what would be the the profession that everybody couldn't stand?
Tax collector.
Oh yeah, tax collector, right?
Shepherd.
What's that?
Shepherd.
Shepherd. Yep. People didn't like those stinky shepherds. They were of lowly class. That's exactly right. Good. All right. Well, let's. I want to jump ahead to another scripture reading here. This is out of Genesis chapter 32, and so what's happened is Jacob and Esau, of course, after this stealing of the blessing thing, what happened between those two?
I'm struggling. They separate, don't they?
Yeah, they go their different ways.
Separate ways, yeah.
Begin building a couple of two different nations, and
Jacob was afraid of Esau. That's why. Wow.
Oh, that's true too. Yeah.
Say again, Dale?
Jacob took off because he was afraid Esau would kill him.
Oh yeah, after stealing his blessing, absolutely. Yeah, he took off. They went their separate ways, and they didn't see each other for a long time. And so finally, Jacob is headed to see Esau, right? And so I want to read just a little bit from chapter 32, and I'm going to start in verse 3, and then we're going to jump down here in a minute. So this is Genesis 32, verse 3. Remember, they've been separated. So Jacob sent messengers ahead of him to his brother Esau into the land of Seir, the country of Edom. And he instructed him, "This is what you say to my lord Esau. Your servant Jacob says, I have been staying in Laban and have remained there till now. I have cattle, donkeys, sheep, and goats, male and female servants. Now I am sending this message to my lord that I might find favor in your eyes. When the messenger returned to Jacob, they said, "We went to your brother Esau, and now he is coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him." Right? In great fear and distress, Jacob divided the people who were with him into two groups, and the flocks and herds and camels as well. He thought, if Esau comes and attacks one group, the other group, the one that's on my left, may escape. Then Jacob prayed, "O God, my father of Abraham, God of my father Isaac, Lord, who said to me, 'Go back to your country and your relatives, and I will make you prosper.' I am unworthy of all the kindness and faithfulness you have shown your servant. I had only my staff when I crossed the Jordan, but now I have become two camps. Save me, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau, for I am afraid he will come and attack me, and also the mothers with their children. But you have said, I will surely make you prosper and will make your descendants like the sands of the sea, which cannot be counted." He spent the night there, and from what he had, he sent with him some gifts to his brother Esau, 200 female goats, 20 male goats, and on and on and on it goes. And then he put servants in front and put them in care of the herds and said, "Go ahead of me and keep some space between the herds." And so what's Jacob doing here for his brother Esau?
Buttering him up.
I think that is the technical biblical term. Absolutely. Buttering him up. And why?
Because he was afraid of him.
Yeah, he's afraid of him. He still feels like his brother may be coming in to take him out, to take his birthright back, right?
Or saying, okay, so please be kind. Look at all the stuff I got that, I can offer unto you. Or
yeah, I think he's pretty afraid. Yeah. So in verse 22, here we get this story of Jacob wrestling with God. And so let's read this. Verse 22, it says, "That night Jacob got up and took his two wives, his two female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the somebody say that word for me. Jabbok. There we go. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. And the man said, 'Let me go, for it is daybreak.' But Jacob replied, 'I will not let you go unless you bless me.' The man asked him, 'What is your name?' 'Jacob,' he answered. Then the man said, 'Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome.' Jacob said, 'Please tell me your name.' But he replied, 'Why do you ask my name?' And he blessed him from there. So Jacob called the place Penuel, which means, 'It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared.' And so the sun rose over him as he passed through, and he was limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the Israelites do not eat the tendon attached to the socket of the hip, because the socket of Jacob's hip was touched near the tendon." So this is a really kind of interesting story, isn't it? What do we make of this story of Jacob wrestling with this man, of wrestling with God in this time? What's the purpose of this story? Why is it in there? Maybe another way to ask that would be, why on the moment before he's supposed to meet his brother, do we get this story about Jacob wrestling with the Lord?
He wants God's forgiveness in addition to his brothers.
Yeah, you may want God's forgiveness in addition to the brothers. Yeah, absolutely. Why else? It's kind of a strange story, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a strange story and a hard one for us to understand. But I think that the gist of it is, Jacob is someone biblically who is who wants a blessing, right? And will do whatever it takes to get that blessing, right? And so I think from what he's doing with his brother, he's fearful of his brother. He's upset, maybe repentant or penitent of what he had done in the past, and wants God to bless him and to not take that all away. And so he wrestles with him. And while he's wrestling, this person, God says, "What is your name?" Right? What is your name? And of course, he replies with his name. And then what does God say?
He gives him a new name. Are we there yet?
Yeah, he gives him a new name.
Yeah.
And what does that mean? What does Israel mean, by the way? It means wrestling with God, right? It's pretty, we name people based on situations in the Bible, right? It means wrestling with God. And so, hold on one second. You ever lose your place in your notes? Yeah. And so, well, just let me read a portion of this book here. This will be on your book. Sorry. If you have your book, it'll be on page 55 at the very top. And here's what he says in talking about names. He says, well, at the very bottom of page 54, let's start there. He says, if we want God to bless us, we need to face up to ourselves honestly. Because this happened for a church member of our congregation just a few weeks ago. He came to me because, in his own words, his life was falling apart. He had been involved in a lifestyle of infidelity, prostitution, and drug taking. Finally, things had caught up with him. He desperately wanted God's blessing. I asked him to go home and to write out a personal inventory of all that he had done. When we got together again, I asked him to read this out in the presence of God. We spoke about how he could begin to make some amends for what he had done. Then I laid my hands on him and prayed for God to bless him with the gifts of forgiveness and a new beginning. I've seen him a few times since that moment. While he is still dealing with the consequences of his actions, there is a wonderful newness about him. He has experienced God's blessing. And so I think it's interesting, that idea that if we want God to bless us, we need to face up to ourselves honestly. The first question is it hard to be honest? And is it hard to be honest with ourselves? But maybe to ask that a different way is, have you ever lied to yourself before? Have you ever done that before?
Isn't that really impossible?
Isn't that really impossible? Say what you mean, Jim.
Well, I mean, you know the truth. So how do you lie about something that you know? I mean, if you can make it a lie in public, but I don't know how you lie to yourself.
Well, let me give you an example of what I mean when I say that. So this was years ago. I was asked to lead a small group study for a pastor who's out of town with a bunch of college kids. And during that study, we talked about honesty and how, Jesus was honest with everyone around him and honest with himself, and God desires for us to be honest with ourselves. And I asked that exact same question. I said, have you ever lied to yourself before? And this girl, and I don't remember her name, I just met her that one time, sitting to my left, just burst out into tears. And when she composed herself, she was able to tell a story. And it just so happened that the Bible study was actually at her parents' house, and her parents were there as we were doing this study. And she said, when I was in high school, I met this guy when I was in the 11th grade, and I thought I loved him, and he was the best thing ever. And he convinced me to drop out of school and to move out and to live with him. And that's what I did. And she said, that was 2 years ago. And she said, at the time, deep down, I knew that was not the right decision to make. I knew deep down that it wasn't going to end well. It wasn't going to be good. And as she's fighting back tears, she said, now, I've just got my GED. I'm back in my parents' house. I'm 21 years old, 20 years old, and I have nothing to show for my life, right? Because I lied to myself, right? And the really great part was, as she wept, her parents came over and embraced her and said, "Look," she said, I'm so sorry, Mom and Dad," and they were able to embrace her and say, "Look, there's nothing to forgive. You're here now, and we're grateful you're home, and we're grateful you're headed on the right path." So, I mean, just a really touching story. But that was somebody who I think she would tell you at that time in her life, even though she knew what was right, she had convinced herself to step a different direction, and in doing so, lying to herself. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Yeah, and I guess there can be some argument whether that's actually lying to yourself or convincing yourself, whatever that is. Yeah, but have you ever deceived yourself in that way before? Maybe you have, maybe you haven't. Something to think about. Here in this story, we also hear Jacob getting a new name, right? Wrestling with God, getting a new name. In getting that new name, how do you think his life was changed, if it was changed? What do we know about him moving forward? I'll just tell you. How about that? I think the big thing we see is that, Jacob means trying to get up by pulling somebody else down, right? Grabbing the heel of your sibling. And that's what we see him do. He tricks his dad into a blessing. He wrestles hard with God so he can get a blessing. And then when he gets his new name, Israel, we don't really see him pulling any of those things anymore, right? He lives into that new person he's going to be. And so I want to read from page 56 here in the book. Here's what it says. It says, "Amazingly, Jacob immediately began to live up to his new name. In fact, we don't see him tricking or deceiving again. There was new humanity in him. When he eventually faced his brother, he bowed down before him 7 times, and they were finally reconciled after all those years. There was also new courage. He was now prepared to meet Esau himself instead of sending others in his place. Jacob was no longer an escapist. He had changed from someone who was always trying to evade hard issues into someone who was willing to face up to what matters. His new name had empowered him in a new way of living." And so it is kind of interesting in his story. We read that he's worried about his brother killing him, and so he sends all these things to his brother, right? And he also divides his company so that, like, his brother attacks, maybe this one's wiped out, but he can still escape with this one, right? And after this evening, this night of wrestling with God, where God gives him this new name, what does he do? Well, he goes out himself to meet his brother, right? Does anybody remember what he did when he went out to meet his brother? How that meeting went?
Bowed down 7 times.
Yeah, I mean, he bowed down 7 times, and how did Esau receive him? I'll
I
tell
think
you.
he accepted him.
Yeah, in verse 33, I'll read from verse, let's see. Yeah, verse 4. It says, "But Esau ran to meet Jacob and embraced him, threw his arms around his neck and kissed him, and they wept. Then Esau looked up and saw the women and the children and said, 'Who are these with you?' Jacob answered, 'They are the children God has graciously given your servant.' Then the female servants and their children approached and bowed down. Next, Leah and her children came and bowed down. And lastly, Joseph and Rachel, they too bowed down. Esau asked, 'What's the meaning of all these flocks and herds I have met?' 'To find favor in your eyes, my lord,' he said. But Esau said, 'I already have plenty, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself.'" Right? And so here we have Esau being very forgiving of his brother who, stole his blessing. And it's kind of interesting, all these years, Jacob thought that just around the corner, Esau was out there to get him, right? He was coming for that blessing. He was coming to take him down. But in reality, what was Esau doing?
I guess you'd say he'd really already forgiven him.
Yeah,
He moved on.
he moved on, right?
Mhm.
Have you ever found a time in your life when, you just felt so guilty or upset for something that you did? And finally, years later, you got up the courage to ask for forgiveness for it, to realize that it wasn't a big deal to that other person at all.
Mhm.
Has that ever happened to you before? Yeah, I still remember one time, and still feel a little guilt about this. When I was in high school, throwing my brother under the bus so hard once. we when he first started driving, the rules were that he could drive to school, he'd take me to school, and then come home, but no friends in the car yet, right? Well, of course, he drove friends home every day, and I rode in the car, and I didn't really care, right? We had the brother code where we didn't tell on each other. That isn't until the one day that I decided after school to go out and get a bite to eat with some friends, which I had done before, but I'd always made it home before my parents got home from work, right? This evening, I did not make it home before my parents got home from work. And so I walked in the door. My parents are, where have you been? You're supposed to be home 3 hours ago. Your brother didn't know where you are, all that kind of stuff. And what I should have said was, well, some friends invited me to go out to eat. I went out to eat, and I'm sorry I didn't make it home on time, and dealt with that, right? Instead, what I said was, I went home with a friend. I went out to eat with a friend because my brother had a friend in the car that I didn't want to ride with.
Ooh.
Right? Which wasn't true. Like, I
Yeah.
knew his friend. He was fine. The worst part about that was my parents bought it pretty well and really came down hard on my brother instead of me for being home late. And it was probably a decade after that that I finally apologized to my brother for throwing him under the bus so hard because, that was gave him my own.
It probably was easier for Esau to forgive Jacob because he left. And so he'd gotten to have his family's wealth and do all right all that time. If he had stayed around, it would have been a whole different story.
Yeah, you're probably right about that. Absolutely. Yeah. Maybe some of that distance helped them to heal some of those wounds too. And boy, that can be certainly true in our life too. And so moving on to the New Testament and our names and who God calls us to be, I want to read from 1 John chapter 3, verse 1. And here's what it says. How great is the love of the Father that he has lavished on us, that we should be called children of God, and that is what we are. So the New Testament, we are given new names as well. Not, we don't change our names, but who does God call us? Calls us children of God. What does it mean to be a child of God? What does that mean?
We are his and his forever. His children, I don't know, unconditionally. That's kind of what I think of. Could be off in left field, but that we are his children no matter what we do, where we are. He always wants us to turn back to him, even if we've turned away. And I'll hush because I've rattled too much. But just the most, he's the most loving, caring, giving person or entity being for us all, always and eternally.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's put pretty well here on page 57. He says, we are God's beloved. That is our true name, our deepest identity, our divine calling. Some readers of these words may find it extremely hard to believe for many reasons, that we are God's beloved. We may find ourselves struggling with negative images about ourselves. Perhaps we struggle with low self-worth and poor self-esteem. Or we may feel that we have sinned too greatly to be worthy of God's love. Or perhaps in the light of some terrible, unfair tragedy, we believe that God is against us. Yet the truth of the gospel is that each one of us is deeply loved, accepted, and forgiven by God in Jesus Christ. Indeed, we have been God's beloved from the beginning of time.
And that's kind of like what, I mean, in a way going on there, I think sometimes even if we confess and ask God's forgiveness, we forget. And I know I've struggled with this sometimes, that he's forgiven us. And if we're, I mean, obviously if we're saying, please forgive me, we turn around and intentionally do the same thing again. Unfortunately, we are human and we're going to continue to sin or to fall away from the path that he would have us take. But he's forgiven us and he's moved on. We're the ones who hang on to the baggage a lot of times, that, we are sad, sorry. We have maybe it's just me. Sometimes I think we have a harder time forgiving ourselves, or feeling that, that we can't forgive and move on. And it's like it's over here and I can't do enough to be penitent, but that's just not really the way it is.
Yeah. Let me ask this question. So we talk about God's love quite a bit in the Methodist Church, right? And I believe that we are indeed God's beloved. Have you always believed that? And can you imagine why some people may struggle to understand or even comprehend how we could be God's beloved? Does that make sense? Have you always believed you're God's beloved, and what struggles might people have to really understand that? Let me explain, and then I'll let you answer. So for me growing up, I was blessed with parents who, from a very early age, told me what I tell my kids, which is, we love you no matter what, right? Doesn't matter what you do, doesn't matter what you fail to do. Our love is not dependent on that, right? I say I'm blessed because I know that is not the home that everybody else grew up in, right? And so do you think it may be harder for some folks who didn't have that unconditional love from an early stage to really try to comprehend what it means to be beloved by God? What do y'all think? Yeah.
And finding meaning in life, and y'all have heard me say before, I got two parts of life. I got BC and AC, before cancer and after cancer, and the amount of love and I've seen it more and more, even through hard times. And I can look back and I give God the praise and the glory. So many things happened earlier in our lives that were leading up to the moment when our lives would be turned upside down, backwards, and every which way, and nothing would ever be the same again. But they're the small, well, not just small blessings, sometimes things that prepared. God was preparing us for this moment through, years before, in some cases, I feel like.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm just saying, who couldn't, but of course some could. Who couldn't doubt the love that, in spite of whatever you want to call it, the difficulty of the journey a lot of times, and the path we were perhaps called to follow, he was in control, and he was watching over us. And that was okay. And I'm a hush, so yeah, you're not gonna finish on time, because this came up in Sunday school class not last year, before, that and I am more and more grateful for that. And I'm happy that I can be grateful, and I can, in spite of that, I know how blessed and loved we are. So shut up, Melba.
No, thank you. I appreciate you sharing that. Yeah. And I think it's interesting that Jacob, early on, with his mom's help, or his mom's pushing, really, decides to steal his brother's blessing, right? He wants to be blessed so bad that he steals his brother's blessing. And then even before he meets his brother, he wants a blessing so bad he just wrestles and wrestles and wrestles and doesn't give up, right? But when you look at the blessing that Jacob received, his greatest blessing was not the herds and the stuff he got from his father. His greatest blessing really was his new name, which in that name came transformation, right? The thing he was blessed most with wasn't the tangible things of life, but it was the transformation that happened to him. And it's funny. We in the States like to use the word blessed to talk about lots of things, right? I saw the picture somebody posted on like Instagram once where they'd gotten a new car, right, at the dealership, and it said it was #blessed, right? Well, is that what God's blessing really looks like? Well, not in full, that's for sure, right? Because tangible things, that one day, where's that car going to be?
In the junk pile, in the what do you call them, place they're pulling parts off.
Yeah, it's going to be rusted and disposed of.
Yeah.
But if we make our lives a blessing and a blessing to others, right, and we pour ourselves into others, what happens with that blessedness we have received from God? Well, I would say it outlives us when we're gone, right? Through our friends, through our family, through our children. One of the things at funerals, when I meet with families, that I almost always ask is what part of your loved one lives on in you, right? What part of your loved one helped make you who you are today? And inevitably, there are some good gifts that people have gotten from those that they love, even if their parents weren't great, right? Even if they're raised by people other than their parents, there are some gifts that go on and go through them because of who they are. And so hopefully in life we can learn from our parents' mistakes and keep the good, get rid of the bad, and pass along those blessings to our children as well. I know this is for all the ones that we're doing, this one is kind of one of the strangest and hardest, I think, to talk about when talking about names. But the thing I want you to remember today is that who we are named, who we are called to be, is children of the living God, right? And I think if we live into that name, if we live into who we are called to be, as Jacob/Israel finally ends up doing, then no, our blessings might not be material, but in the fullness of time, our blessings and the ways in which we bless long outlive us. Does that make sense?
Is that kind of like blessed to be a blessing, maybe a little bit?
Hey, that works for me. You should sell those bumper stickers. Somebody probably already does, don't they?
I'm sure.
Yeah. Okay, well, good. Well, that's all I got planned for today. Anything else about this chapter y'all want to talk about that I missed? Good. Well, just remember this, that we who follow Christ, our name is God's beloved, right? That's who we are. Our new name is God's beloved. And so may you be blessed by God, but most importantly, may you be a blessing to others because of God as well. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. All right. Well, thank you all for joining me.
Thank you.
I guess I won't see y'all tonight because you're joining me now. But may you go in peace, and may the peace of God go with you. Just a heads up, next week, I will likely be doing the Zoom session. I'll be camp pastor next week, and so Martha will likely be here in the evening to do the in-person session for me.
Okay. All right.
Thank you, Andrew.